Hello and a warm welcome to this week's edition of Captains of Industry. I'm David Williams. Joining me in the hot seat this evening is the man at the helm of one of South Africa's leading financial services companies, Alexander Forbes. He's the Group CEO. He is Edward Kieswetter. Hi, Edward.
Hello, David.
Before we go any further, we're going to talk about your business experience. We're going to talk about your personal experience, your life and so on. But there's a guy playing cricket for England called Craig Kieswetter, or Kieswetter. Any relation?
Well, there's only one Kieswetter clan in South Africa, so I don't know Craig personally, but there would be a distant relation.
Yeah, no, he's playing cricket for England, and that not very well last night, the English team, and we won there.
I actually tweeted that I have mixed feelings. I'm hoping that he does well, but not too well.
Letting the family down.
He complied.
That's good. But Edward, I first interviewed you in the studio like this when you were at SARS, and I think that's where you came to prominence for a lot of people. I mean, you had a busy career, but SARS must have been an interesting place because in the old days, it was very much the civil service, a bureaucracy. It was slow, it was tired, wasn't very efficient in terms of collecting tax. And it changed possibly more than any other government department and maybe any institution in South Africa. It changed completely. And you were there. How did you come to be there in the first place?
Well, I think I'd reached, after a few years in banking, needed to do something that contributed and made a difference to our country on a different level. And in a conversation with the then Commissioner Pravin Gordhan and the then Minister Trevor Manuel, realized that this was a very, very practical way that I could bring to bear my skills and the blessings of my past experiences to make a meaningful difference to our young democracy.
You say in a conversation with Pravin Gordhan, had you known him for a long time? Was it a chance encounter?
I knew the Minister of Finance, Trevor Manuel, before. I knew of Pravin Gordhan, but I didn't know him personally, and had the privilege to get to know him very well during the
People sometimes say to me, who's the most impressive person you've ever interviewed? And of course there are many, but I would say Pravin Gordhan has to be certainly in the top 2 or 3. Partly because he's so able to express what he wants to express. And he doesn't give you anything. I mean, he doesn't make himself a soft touch. But on the other hand, he's fair. You've got to pull yourself together mentally. When you start talking to him, you've got to have your ducks in a row, don't you?
Absolutely. I mean, I've had many conversations with him, and I mean, you always had to be alert. You had to be clear about what you wanted to communicate and what you wanted out of the conversation. And I think that's good. It made for meaningful, constructive engagement, and out of that came many of the advances that we as South Africans today benefit from.
Well, you watched him and you did some of these things yourself. You were head of the large business centre at SARS. You were in a senior position there, Deputy Commissioner. How did you do it? How did you move from that civil service mentality and practice to this, I would argue, the one institution in the state where the private sector can say, how do they do it?
I think, and this goes back to the kind of leadership that Pravin Gordhan provided. To be clear about a sense of what is the higher purpose that drives one. This has nothing to do with whether you're in civil service or in private sector. I think the same ethos of serving must be top of mind. And with Pravin Gordhan, he was clear that the Revenue Authority, the Revenue and Customs Authority of our democracy was there to capacitate democracy. And that the higher purpose was that the work that we did had huge impact to enable government to deliver the services that South Africans deserved. And I think that went ahead of any other, what I call bells and whistles and lipstick or on the bulldog or fixing the bulldog itself. It was about clarity of purpose.
He also seemed to be able to blend the old and the new. I mean, there were lots of old civil servants from the old era who were there, well, not all of them old, but from the old era, blending with in a genuine transformation sense. So you were changing the institution and changing the makeup. That seems to have been achieved, not without problems, I don't know, but certainly very well.
Well, I think, you know, he went beyond just doing that. He did that, but he also went beyond that. You know, my perspective, I don't know what he would say, but my perspective was that Pravin Gordhan was able to suspend the ideological divides that amplifies our differences and to look for the common good in people. And he did that by taking the previously white civil servants and giving them a sense that they were needed, they had a sense of place to belong, and also bringing in new candidates which were historically disadvantaged, and blended the two without anyone feeling alienated. So you would see a good blend of promotion from within, but also bringing that. But going beyond that also meant that going to any other jurisdiction, whether it was the Australians, the New Zealanders, the Americans, the Nordic countries, the UK, the European countries, it didn't matter what ideological perspectives underpinned these countries. The fact was, if we could learn from that, unashamedly we went and learned from that. And I think that accelerated the transformation of SARS, and that's a huge credit to Pravin Gordhan.
What were some of the tough things you had to do there where, I mean, tough targets were set, I know, but were there times when you thought, you know, this is actually too big a job, not necessarily for you, but for anyone?
Not a single moment, David. I think it was a huge sense of privilege to be able to have such an influential role. It was a great learning opportunity.
You must have taken a lot out of it in a managerial sense and in a personal sense.
Oh, absolutely. I grew so much in that 6 years, almost 6 years that I worked at the South African Revenue Service, but also Pravin Gordhan built an incredible team around him with a blend of public and private sector skills, and was given a tremendous vote of confidence by the then Minister of Finance that I think created the autonomy that SARS needed whilst being held accountable by the political principle.
Were you tempted to stay? Because you were obviously tempted to go, but you must have left with difficulty, having had such a good time.
I left with a heavier heart. And because I still believe today that every democracy needs a well-functioning revenue and customs authority, and that is what SARS has become.
Well, let's talk about where you went from there. I mean, you were at Eskom before, you've done different jobs, but the other big job, if you like, compared to the SARS one, and I suppose in the prime of your business career, Alexander Forbes, Chief Executive. Now, you came in there from the outside. You're an electrical engineer, and we'll talk about your upbringing and education a bit later, but Alexander Forbes had reputational issues. I remember in particular the bulking scandal, and the details of that I don't remember anymore, but it was an unethical practice that shouldn't have been allowed. And there was the life care issue. Now, you came in. What did you, when you sat down with those guys, what did you see it as your job to do with them?
You know, something very interesting about human nature is we tend to protect our narrow self-interest. And then we lose sight of the bigger picture. We lose the plot. So, understandably, what Alexander Forbes did, it defended itself. Not necessarily in what it was being accused of, but in the way that this process was managed. It had to defend itself. So, for example, this huge civil claim, a long list
Just give us the summary of it, yeah?
The summary of it was when the pension fund Act changed from the defined benefit to the defined contribution, all the pension funds had to do an assessment of the assets relative to the liabilities of those funds, which then produced either a surplus or a deficit. In instances of surpluses, the law then determined how those surpluses would be apportioned. And then there were some structures that were created by some people who thought they were smart, but effectively, if one gets to the root of it, took away money that belonged to pensioners, and it ended up in other pockets. Now, Alexander Forbes itself did not benefit by any of those monies, but it was the advisor to one of the funds that was used as part of this complex set of transactions.
So you had to fix this, or fix the reputational damage?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of hard work that had already done before I got there. But the one fundamental change was asking a different question. So it seemed quite obvious that we needed to defend ourselves. But when I came along, within the first few minutes of listening to the scheme and understood that it was going to be difficult for me as a new CEO to unravel and understand the intentions of the people who were part of these transactions, but what was clear to me was the consequence of those actions had a negative impact on the pensioners. So my question was, why are we not defending the pensioners? And I believe that if we were defending the pensioners, we would come out of this better, stronger, but also we would have done the right thing.
And the life care issue?
Well, that was the life care issue, particularly that I refer to now.
Okay.
The other matter that you refer to is the bulking issue,
Yeah.
which again, you know, that was, I think the big lesson there is about disclosure. Because the life care practice itself, had it been negotiated and disclosed, could have been very, very acceptable to all the shareholders. The real issue there was not disclosing it appropriately, that then ended up being this, you know, huge issue that then had to be defended and fixed.
What do you do all day as chief executive of a company like that? You came from outside. Where do you spend your time? Where do you focus your energies in Alexander Forbes?
With people. So right from interacting with the leaders of our big businesses, we have 4 large divisions in South Africa, and then we have an Africa division outside of South Africa, and then we have an international division that operates in the United Kingdom, in a few locations in Europe, and in the Isle of in the Jersey Isles. So a lot of this requires continuous interaction to help give strategic guidance, to create the strategic intent for the organization, and then to negotiate performance contracts and outcomes to which each of these managing directors and chief executives can then work. So a lot of interaction with leadership, but at the same time, this gives me the wonderful opportunity to adopt what I consider a natural posture as a leader, and that's to be a coach, a mentor, and to look for opportunities where we can grow together through the art. So it's a dual function of one, driving the business, but also building people.
In a short answer, is it a good company, and how do we know it's a good company?
It is an excellent company. Alexander Forbes, and I've had the privilege to work with a number of large organizations, both public and private sector. I have found the brightest, the smartest, the most passionate people in Alexander Forbes. And it's also a lesson of the critical and differentiating role of leadership. Because it is leadership that unlocks all of that potential and brings it to bear to create superior value for clients, a great place for employees to work, positive impact on the community, and in the process create the fair returns that shareholders deserve.
Well, we're going to a short commercial break now. More with Alexander Forbes' Chief Executive, Edward Kieswetter, when we return.